In your book, especially, you are reviewing history, or you view the history through the lens of narratives and social constellations. I really want you to share with us a little bit to set the background of this conversation. Why do you think it's such a key to understanding history and our direction maybe to the future? Why do you think like the narratives and the social constellations are the thing?
Well, first of all, I want to say every conversation I've had here has immediately been so interesting. So thank you guys, everybody I talked to. And the other thing I want to say, when I was listening to Josh and he was talking about the past and here we are, we're going to build something for the future. It reminded me that I think we have a tendency to think of history as something that was finally going to end here. And this is what history was all coming to. And, you know, Josh, you picked up on the future, but I think there's a version of that about the future too. You know, there's a way of thinking about the future is that then we'll get there and then we'll be there. What do we want there to be like? There is not there. We're going to get there and then we're just going to go on through. So there's something more eternal that we're wondering about. The other thing that I guess was relevant here, you asked about history as narrative, or why was I interested in narrative of history? So I'll just say that what comes to me is that all history is a narrative. There isn't such a thing as the real history, what's actually objectively happening, and then our telling of it. Trillions of things have happened. So history per se is always not just a collection of facts, it's a curated selection of facts put together in a certain way. For what reason? Why do we put a history together in some way rather than another? It's because we want to illuminate some question about now. History is always us looking in the rearview mirror to try to figure out where we're going, you know. So, and the other thing about that, as I discovered when I wrote a postscript to Invention of Yesterday 5 years after I published it, you look in the rearview mirror and the past is not the one you saw 5 years ago. You know, the past keeps changing too. What was the question again?
The lens of the narrative, and I'll give you my kind of the reason I really I think connected to your book is I really believe in the power of story. I call them stories. And in my work, I feel like one of the biggest tools for transformation is through understanding the stories we tell about ourselves and our situation, and having the ability of being able to tell different stories about it.
Yeah.
Right. And in my point of view, stories are the ones creating reality rather than reality, more than reality is somehow telling us about the stories. I feel like it's the relationship more the other way. So the stories we tell about ourselves, about our situation, creates the reality that we live in and our behavior. So this is for individual realm. And I felt like there's a similar sense in the book. It's the narratives we create about what's going on determines also, not just with the story we tell about the past, but the narratives we have around the situation determines people's behavior and what they do.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The story is not just about the past, it's about right now. We are characters living in a story. And as characters living in a story, that determines what we think we're going to do and what we want to do. When you say, how can we use technology to benefit, you know, to do something good for the future? Well, you know, everybody who's situated in this reality, in this social reality that we're in, has an answer to that. Well, I shouldn't say everybody has an answer. Many people don't have an answer and they're fumbling in the darkness, wondering what they're going to do. But to the extent that anybody has an answer, they have some sense of who they are as human beings and what they and people they know and the reality that they're, you know, that they live in and they think of as the right now of the present. What would we all want to be living in the future. Somebody here said, I want to be living in a future where I get everything I want, and there's a diverse collection of people that constitute civilization and culture, and my children are of all possible parts of that. Something like that. Well, that's one version of reality. Our question is, where are we right now, and who is the we that wants something right now? I think the key to the link between history and story is that story is how we get a sense of an all of us. In history, as we've been telling it, a sense of who is all of us has always included a sense of who's not part of all of us. There's always been a them that enables us to get a sense of who we are, because we're not those guys. I think that we've come to a place, to a point in human history where we occupy the whole planet, and we are in some form of intercommunication with every other human on the planet, whether or not we know it. And so we have to arrive at some sense of a story in which all of us can see ourselves as characters, as in some way part of all of us. I don't know how we're going to do it, because we don't know how to do it yet. The reality we're living in is completely riven with a reaction to the all of usness of today's reality that's driving people into trying to form identities within smaller stories that can compete with everybody else's story and triumph. All right, so
So do you mean more in the global sense, all of us, to include humanity, that we are getting like too small in these groups? Or are you talking about, it doesn't matter the size of but like we should find a place and a sense of we as societal self?
I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about my own background. I came from Afghanistan. I was born a very long time ago from the point of view of everybody I see in the room here. And when I was born in Afghanistan, it was living in a earlier period of history, let's say probably the Middle Ages or something like that. Okay, so one of the things about the social structure of Afghanistan was that because it was situated amidst all the major civilizations of that time, with the Chinese world over there, the Turkic world over there, the Persian world over there, the Indian, there was the West that was coming through to some extent, blah, blah, blah. Everybody, every single different kind of civilization on Earth was pouring through there, but the geography of the country was such that everybody lived in a little valley. They didn't know who it was 20 miles away. So they had to face two things. The fact that almost everybody they were likely to meet was a stranger. It made a society that everybody was inward looking and living in a very small place in a very monocultural setting. At the same time, they had to deal with to repeat, everybody was living in a bubble of monoculturalism. Everybody they had to all the time they had to deal with Turks coming, Chinese coming, Persians coming. You had to deal with incredible multiculturalism and live in incredible monoculturalism. And what the society developed to cope with that was the compound. And everybody I knew until I was 9 or 10 lived in a place surrounded by high walls. I did, everybody else did. And we didn't know who was in the next compound. But there were many other compounds in the city and in little villages as much as 10 or 20 miles away that were our compounds. So all of those were us. And everybody around us was not us. But that didn't matter, because there was a public out there that, the men could go out there. The women never went out there except covered with a chaudhari. but the women could go to other compounds, and there they were home. What happened in my lifetime is modernization came, and the compound system just couldn't last because it separated, the society into male and female, public and private, and that country could not prosper in the middle of history that way. They broke down the walls. Everybody was facing everybody, and it turned out there was 100 little cultures in Afghanistan. And what happened next was a war of everybody with everybody. And the place was destroyed. It turned into rubble. And I think there is something like that coming here. I think that there is a sense in which there is a recoil from the fact that in your daily life, you're always encountering other cultures. And if you live in a city, you're kind of more used to that. You have ways you've developed of, yeah, okay, you're some other culture, that's fine. But if you're living in the rural hinterlands, you never see that, and you have to deal with it some other way. So now we look at America and we see identity clusters trying to form and failing to form because you can't bottle yourself up. You can't be separate from all the other things going on. And nobody's figured out a way to cope with it. So now we look at technology and what that's how is that going to help with that? I did some classes or something at UC Berkeley last year, the year before, I forget when it was. But anyway, at that point, you had to do a DEI course, and it was going to make you a better human being, or at least, when I was a hippie in the 60s and I wanted to be a better human being, that's the things we talked about. We did want to be better human beings. And I did this course, and it was like, here's a situation. It was all textual, blah, blah, blah. These are the rules. Okay, here are 4 choices. Which would you choose? No, they're not good. Go back. No. Okay, that's good. And I'm doing this thing because I had to, but I'm asking myself, is this actually making me more or less likely to abuse somebody, be sexist, racist, whatever? I don't think it's actually having any effect on that. It is only training me to be part of some digital machinery. That's what it's training me to do. It has nothing to do with becoming a better human being. That better human being part can only come from being with live human beings in a room. So that's something we face
here because in the book somewhere you mention that societal self emerges among the conversations between different people. That's how we create a societal self. And that made me think, because now if we look at the digital scape, are we really having even conversations with other people? So now we have a mediator AI. Like I see so many posts everywhere. It's like, okay, it's like, this is AI speak, the AI speak. I know that this is written. And I see videos and they are still speaking. I see your face, but you're reading a script that is written by AI. So I am actually, maybe it looks like I'm in a conversation and communication with others where I'm not actually. There's AI in between us. And that is like an interesting thing to me. Like, how do we create the social self when AI is in between, or whatever AI is mediating with use of the mirror of the human culture and history and stuff like that? Is that going to be a force that help us to go under an umbrella of a self created by AI, and then because we are all looking at it? Or is it going to kind of break down our ability to create a social self? And what happens if we fail? Everybody gets deeper into their personal, right? Like when you go to social media, TikTok, you get like into the depths of your personal interests more and more and more and more. And then I'm talking to my husband and he has no idea what I'm talking about because I went so deep in the rabbit hole of this one particular interest. Like I cannot even get him to the same level. So he doesn't know what I'm talking about. So are we making it harder for us to get a social self? Or is it a good thing to have a mediator, maybe connect all of us?
Well, If conversation could happen, there would still be the question of, is the conversation just text-based? Because text is very yes and no. It's not analog, it's digital, so it's like it follows it's fundamentally driven by the algorithm. Can we have conversations? But there is something else about the structure of the way that technology has invaded conversations among people, which is that, you can look at Twitter or Facebook or Quora or any of these. You don't see any conversations there. Everybody's on the same side. They all agree, and they just pile on. So where does the conversation occur? It's not there. I also remember, back in the old days when I used to, I was working at home, and there was publishing companies I worked for, and I remember there was something came up, and all the editors were over there in Chicago, and I was over here in San Francisco, and I had an opinion, somebody there had an opinion, and we went back and forth about it. But then finally somebody said, we all pretty much agree that this thing that they thought. So I think, it's 20-1. I think we're right. And I was like, but you guys are all in a room together. When you're all in a room together, you start to become an us. And one of the things that characterizes an us is we feel comfortable sharing a common opinion, which can, in the bad sense, it can become a mob, or in the good sense, it can become an organic social entity which has agency and is able to formulate agendas and take actions to carry out self-interest for the group. Now, that's exactly what a person is, in my opinion. A person is, at the core, it's kind of attached to a physical body here. I guess it's rarely there without my body. But that's not what I am. It's just this. I am memories. I am attitudes. I'm a social role. The fact that I'm a brother and I have a sister, and I'm a writer, and blah, 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 wife, blah, all this different stuff. All of these are like this field, and it has some kind of wholeness, and that wholeness is me as a person. Well, that's also true of when social entities form. The difference between a biological me and that is that the skin is very definite about what's me and what's not me. But a San Francisco type of person, there's no skin there. You can sort of be with people from Las Vegas, and you're not the same. You're two different, but there's kind of like you can discover that you both like margaritas or something. So I think that the more that intercommunication among humans becomes purely text-based, the less possible it is for that murkiness between two social entities to enable the formation of larger common social entities, which is the process we need to arrive at a global human self. That's what I'm hoping we can get to.
Do you believe that societal self is crucial for survival of the species? What benefit does it serve that I have an understanding of if I'm a happy human being, I'm in my rabbit holes with my TikTok, I form my views, I'm living in this universe of one, and I'm happy. Is that good enough? Or do we need a societal self?
Well, it occurred to me when Josh said something about values that we want to still be able to have them in a world in which our capacities have been multiplied by AI. The values question is still there. And what I'm thinking about is values can only come from human life. That values, is it right or wrong for that stone to be kicked off this mountain by a hurricane and hit that poor tree? That's not even a question. It's not about, values exist in human life. And I'm remembering that I voiced a concern at some point that what if AI becomes globally interconnected and so powerful that it decides humans are unnecessary. And the person to whom I was speaking said, well, why are humans necessary? And I'm like, well, I can't answer that question. but I don't want us to be unnecessary.
I see it every day in conversation with people. There is a good percentage of people that I know in San Francisco in technology that are completely okay, humans not existing anymore, as long as there's another conscious thing emerges out of that, because they're going to be better than us. And I feel this is a lot to do with suffering, in my opinion. I think it has a lot to do with suffering. And, like I feel it's common here. You can have success, you can have the means, you can have all the things that, everybody says like you should have. And if you have these things, you made it, you should be happy. And people are not happy and they are still suffering. And it becomes like about being human. This being human is so much suffering. And I guess what? I can get rid of this body and humanness. It feels for species survival depends on the will to survive.
Yeah.
And there is a way that I am seeing that, okay, like the humanity doesn't need to survive. And as long as something better comes along, and it's hoped to be AI. But if we lose the will for survival as a species, I don't know how much chance do we have, let alone AI destroying us. I think we are capable of doing it ourselves very well using the tools that we have. So and I think in that sense, the societal self, do you think it's going to lead us to have more of a will for survival, or it doesn't have anything to do with that?
I don't know about that one way or the other. I think about the question of meaning in very personal terms. I think that there's a truth that one can not avoid noticing, which is that pretty much everyone who has lived so far has died, and that there has been a certain romantic longing to be able to conquer death, but nobody has figured that out.
They're working on it. I have clients working on it.
And they have people who are working on it. And I know that in the technology, I was going to say the technology community, but I think maybe community is not the right word there. But I think that there is this optimism or dream floating around now that maybe more immortality is possible. And up till now, I think all humans that have delved into the philosophical mode of interaction with reality have placed the issue of death finally as central to discovering meaning, so that there has been no avoiding the fact that the way that you have to accommodate or grapple with life itself is it's like getting on a plane and that takes off, and the announcement comes on that, well, we've discovered that we don't have a landing gear, so this plane is going to crash, but not right away. So please, enjoy the ride. Drinks are available. There's a selection of movies. TikTok is one of the things you can access. And you go, well, okay, but, what do you do about this thing that you finally die? And at a certain point, I was enamored of the Hindu idea about that, which is reincarnation, And the thing that puzzled me was that Hinduism included this idea that, and then you die and then you come back in another, but there's a way out, there's a way out. Buddha said that too, you can get out of this whole reincarnation thing. And I'm like, dude, why get out of it? Another life, what could be better? Endless more chances. Now I realize, wait, the story you're living in that case is always one that's pretty much starts with a joyous beginning and ends with suffering and death. That's not a very nice story. Maybe that's a story you do want to get out of. I don't think AI and technology is going to solve that one. I don't care who thinks they're going to be immortal. I think in the end, you have to deal with the fact that you're born, you live for a while, and then you die. And but other people will live, and if we all die, if the species dies, other species will go. That's my version of optimism right now. I take some cheerfulness of that. The things are bad, but doesn't mean life won't survive. Humans will be gone, but so what? But but in a more limited sense, I kind of want humans to survive. Certainly my kids. Can I just intrude for a moment with something? I was talking with somebody here about language, and I don't know where you are now, but you said language turns out to be surprisingly easy, and I said, well, I've been doing a lot of translation is one of my hobbies, so translating Farsi poetry, Persian poetry into English, and I've spent years and years on a quatrain, so and there was once a couplet, first couplet of a sonnet by Hafiz, which reads, "Agar on Bukharara." So that's the Persian thing. Literally translated, if that Turk from Shiraz were to take my heart in hand for that Hindu mole, I would give Samarkand and Bukhara. That literal translation doesn't get what that couplet does. Why not? Well, because in English, already that Turk is infected with movies that are about Turks, and they're not beautiful and young.
Watch your steps. You're talking to a Turk.
Huh?
Watch your steps.
I know.
You're talking to Turk. I'm joking.
I know, but
I'm just joking.
I'm saying, no, actually, you're making my point. And a mole, that doesn't sound. I don't get the mole thing. And I'm going to give my give this person Samarkand and Bukhara. That means nothing to most people English speaking. So there's a whole history there. Samarkand and Bukhara, you can't translate that. You have to find something that occupies the same meaning, contextual space in Western history, which might be, I don't know, Rome might be one, and maybe Paris, I'm not sure. You think about it. That Hindu mole, a mole just doesn't cross over. You'd have to have something that registers as erotic, but it isn't it isn't conventionally erotic. So maybe tattoo, tattoo. Now it's different. I was thinking about this, 20 years ago. So tattoos had crossed the line from what something sailors had to something, hipsters had. Everything in just that couplet is connected to history, culture, all kinds of things. You cannot translate that way. So if you got AI to translate, it would translate it that way. How would it know how to substitute Turk for something that works? Because Turk would be somebody in the Islamic world that wouldn't be foreign. It would be the next culture over, a culture that registers as not us, but civilized, gorgeous, has a bunch of maybe Japan. Japan is kind of industrialized. So when you make all those kinds of transitions, you find yourself sinking away from just those two lines of poetry into endless worlds of history, world, culture. Endless worlds of history, world, culture. Sorry. So that's why I think language is difficult for uh, AI, unless AI becomes something that a computer could deal with that's not silicon based, that's liquid based, like human life. But then you'd have life. So,
Yeah. So this takes me to think about also humanness and what we need as humans, as organic beings. And in one of your interviews I read, you give this example of like what happened in Afghanistan. And when Soviet came in and Americans came in, they had this idea that once the material goods and benefits starts flowing in, they will win the Afghans. Afghans are going to be on board because, like, let's see, we did all this, and now see, you have this, and it's gonna. And then you're mentioning something about feeling at home, like that they didn't understand.
yeah.
Why this was not enough. So I want you to talk about it a little bit so that we can drive a parallel to what's maybe happening right now, because I think that's a good metaphor for what might be happening with AI, because we always talk about like AI is gonna, okay, like we're gonna solve cancer, we're gonna bring abundance, we're gonna all these things, and it's gonna be so great for humans. And I think we are missing a part of the story there. And I think that really puts, it's a good metaphor for it. Can you share a little bit more what you meant in that interview?
Well, what I was talking about was that in that case, I was saying both the Soviets and the Americans assumed that the one thing Afghanistan didn't have and wanted was more material comforts, goods, whatever. I think that was actually a misreading. When I was growing up, Afghanistan was commonly charted as the poorest country on earth. Very commonly thought that. But actually, I don't think that was true. Most people were okay where they were. They didn't, it's like child mortality was very high. Everybody died before they were 5. And then if they didn't, then they lived till 80. But a few got past the age of 5. But what they had was this, what pretty much every Afghan had in Afghan culture was they were not alone. They were part of some people, and they felt at home when they got into that compound world. And the thing that the Soviets and the Americans both were not able to create was a world in which Afghans felt at home, partly because they didn't know that world even existed for Afghans, because that was the private world. The compound worlds were to keep out the foreigners and the neighbors. And nobody was supposed to look over the compound and get that home world. So what I got to thinking was that the pace of social change is such that many people don't feel at home where they are now, and that they can be invaded by the anxiety of feeling that in the world that's coming, everybody will be homeless. We'll all be homeless. Nobody will have a home to be in. And that's an anxiety that's hard to pin to any particular menace that you're facing. But it can be pervasive, in my opinion. And I regularly go to Kentucky I have people there that I need to visit. So I'm often in rural Kentucky, and then I'm in San Francisco. And what I feel is that, the sense of the world turning into a place that doesn't feel like home is a nagging anxiety that politics can exploit. So that when, for example, in the run-up to the 24 election, Vance and the Trump people said, immigrants are coming and they're going to eat your cats and dogs. It sounded just so bizarre. And my political affiliations all got busy saying, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? There's no evidence. And it wasn't about evidence. It was like an expression of how people were feeling. And that was not possible to counter with evidence showing it was wrong, because the feeling that was being activated by that was not on the table. You couldn't talk about it. That was not spoken of. And I think that's something that we have to think about, because I don't see anything that's going to slow down the pace of change or enable the acculturation of living humans to the world that's coming. Because like I said, it's not we're going to get to a place and then we'll all finally be able to relax and we'll just be there. No, we'll be going on from there to somewhere else.
How do we make sure that we reserve some space of feeling at home? Besides all the wonderful things that the AI gonna bring, how to make sure that?
Well, one of the things that's an ingredient of feeling at home is feeling like you're a vital part of some bigger thing. And I think most people who work in AI have access to that because they are part of a bigger thing. And if you're any good at what you're doing, and I kind of feel like probably all of you are, then you are a vital part of some bigger thing. So you don't face that existential dread of being unnecessary. So you guys who are building AI, take a moment to think about us in our little hovels in the corners of San Francisco, worrying about the fact that we're not needed for anything. That's the flip side of the future in which everything you want is provided and you don't have to do a thing.
Believe me, you would think this is only about outside of AI, but I was just talking to someone who is very prominent. It was really involved in AI for a long, long time. And they were just telling me they came to a point. It's like AI is a black hole. It's going to suck everything. And like, it doesn't make sense for me to do anything. It's going to take over me. If the top of AI field feels like that, I think it's going to just matter of time. The rest of the population really have that feeling. And because for most of us, it's coming. I think AI people are not protected from that either, in a way.
Yeah, maybe.
We're all on the same boat, and we have a lot of things to figure out. And that's the goal of today's gathering. So we don't have really answers. We just wanted to give some, food for thoughts so that we can have a conversation together and to discuss. I want to ask a last question. So having spent so much time with all these wonderful, by the way, we have the books right there if you want to purchase. The Invention of Yesterday, it's full of very interesting, great stories besides giving that whole perspective of the history through narratives and social constellations. You can do so. But having spent that time, what do you think you can see maybe most people around you don't see? Do you feel like it gave you a different perspective that it's not very commonplace?
Well, only the bicultural thing, I think. I think that's the only place where I have something that, and I think more and more people are going to be in my boat as far as that's concerned. But I grew up with, I mentioned to a few people, my mother was the first American woman to marry an Afghan and go live there. So she grew up in Chicago. She went to this compound world. And then within that compound world, she set up a bubble that I lived in. So I was in this American little bubble surrounded by Afghanistan as far as the eye could reach, as far as the imagination could reach, actually. And I was in both worlds, but when I went out of one world, I was in the other world. And when I came back in, I was in world B. And I was aware that I couldn't be in both worlds at once, because those were two different people. And it was a different reality when I crossed that border. But one thing that did for me, I feel like most people who grow up in one world, whatever it might be, there's much that they assume as just reality. And I grew up kind of with the consciousness that, that's just that reality. And then there's another reality in which everything looks different when you step across that line, especially when it comes to values. You think those are just like, anybody would assume that's what you do. That was never true for me. So a lot of what I do as a writer is try to illuminate that relativity of truth without moving into but there is no truth. I don't think that. I really think there's never a moment when you should stop looking for. I'm a Muslim, so if you think there's only one God and it's everybody's God, and there's only one final reality, and you have to keep striving to point that way, knowing that you will never get there. That's what I think I have from my background that might be idiosyncratic.